Hey, I'm Zach McDonald, your real estate agent with Real Property Associates, and today we're going to talk about negotiating a home buyer inspection. All right, before we jump into the actual negotiating process, I want to set the stage here really quick. You're going to be purchasing a home, and during that process, you're going to have a contract. And in that contract, we're going to include a few different contingencies. One of them is going to be your financing contingency, and the other main contingency is an inspection contingency. And during this inspection period, you're going to be able to get an inspection on the home. So there's a few different inspections. We'll talk about those in a sec. And you're also going to have the opportunity to negotiate with the seller for repairs or concessions if needed. So that's kind of the backdrop. Typically, this inspection period lasts for 5 to 10 days. Once this period's over, that's when you're going to be committed to this purchase and moving forward as is. So let's talk a little bit about what this process looks like. The first thing you're going to do in the inspection negotiation process is actually gather information. So this is going to be the inspection. You're going to have a home inspector come out and inspect the property. They're going to look at the systems and the structure of the house. They're going to go over it more as a generalist. They're not necessarily a specialist in one particular field, but they have a general knowledge about homes and their construction in the different time periods and different eras. And in Seattle, you've got early 1900s houses all the way to new construction. Some markets are a little bit different. But in Seattle, there's a lot of different construction methods, a lot of different materials used, and the inspectors all have a general knowledge about this and are going to be able to relay information to you as the home buyer. Now, sometimes they're going to point out things that maybe they don't have super deep knowledge on. They might suggest that you talk to a licensed contractor, somebody that specializes in a specific area. That might be a roofer. If they see something with the roof, they might see something that tips them off that there might be a potential problem. You would be able to get further inspections, and so that's one of the options in our negotiating period is to get further inspections from them. They might recommend you talk to an electrician, et cetera, et cetera. But the point of this initial period is to gather additional information. The second part of this inspection negotiation period is actually your response as the buyer. So we've got the information gathering and inspection period, and then we have your response. And so before the end of that contingency, you're going to need to make a formal response to the seller. And in that response, we're going to have a few different options. We can either decide to, one, just proceed as is, good to go, no problems. That does happen sometimes. Oftentimes there's little things that we can negotiate, sometimes really big things that need to be negotiated before moving forward. But that's the first option. The second option would be, okay, there are a few things that we need to get ironed out before deciding to move forward. The third option is kind of in that same vein as asking for concessions. So maybe instead of asking for repairs, you might just ask for some closing costs to be covered or something like that. Same as cash, essentially, so that you can get those repairs taken care of afterwards. That would be like A and B, right? And then this third option is you are going to be able to conduct further inspection. So if the inspector does note, hey, you should probably get a little bit more information about the electrical system, or it looks like there's rodents in the crawl space, you should probably talk to somebody that specializes in rodent remediation, something like that. Super common in Seattle, by the way. Rats definitely like to live in basements and also attics, and it's very common to see that on an inspection report. The other option you're going to have is to back out. So if the house is just terrible, and rarely do I find a situation where a client says, you know what, it's just so bad I can't even buy it anymore. A lot of times we come into one of these first two, we either have more inspections that are needed, or we're going to be doing some kind of negotiating over what is, what the issues are. Every once in a while, though, the issues are so bad, it's like, no, I don't even want to move forward. And for each person, there's different thresholds of pain, I guess you could call it, but there's a different threshold of work that needs to be done. And for each person, that's going to be a little different. So that's something that we can talk about as we proceed. If we do decide to get additional information in inspections, I typically recommend that when there are bigger issues that need to be looked at, because it's hard to negotiate with a seller if you don't know what the issue really is. And a lot of times the seller doesn't know what the issue is either. And so it's really an information gathering, exploratory process, get a few bids from different people. And that gives you the ammo to approach the seller with a credible source to say, hey, this really is a big deal. The inspector said it's a big deal, and the contractor says this isn't working right. We would like this to be addressed. And the seller, when they actually can see the numbers, it's a lot more of a strong argument for having your work taken care of than if you just said, hey, the inspector says there's an issue with the electrical. Whatever the electrical issues are, we would like you to hire an electrician to fix all the electrical issues. Well, you don't know what you're getting yourself into if you're the seller, so why would you sign up for that, right? And so if you're the buyer, maybe the problem's not as big as it seems, and it could be bigger than it seems. So I always recommend if it's a bigger item, go ahead and get further inspections. You can get additional time for those further inspections, and that allows you to approach the seller with confidence and actual information, which is then going to be helpful in those negotiations. And then the third part of this process is the seller's response. So you're going to gather information as the buyer. You're going to either get additional inspections or make your response. But once you get your information, you're going to eventually make your formal response to the seller, and that's going to be your request for repairs or concessions, right? And that's assuming that you didn't back out already or decide to move forward as is, right? Now the seller has the opportunity to evaluate your response. Are they okay with moving forward? So they can say, yes, that sounds good to me, super reasonable, and usually having some bids and quotes helps. Some sellers have done this process before, so they're a little bit more ready to negotiate or more prepared psychologically for this process. If the seller says, you know what, I think this is absolutely unreasonable, I'm not going to do any of this, the seller can respond that way as well and say, nope, not doing any of it. Or the seller can say, you know what, I'll do this part of it, or maybe they'll even change it. Maybe they'll say, you know what, I don't have the money or I don't want to take care of this before we close, but I'll give you a closing cost credit to kind of offset the cost. That's also another option. So the seller can either say, yep, sounds good, nope, not doing it, or hey, let's propose an alternative strategy here. So as the buyer, those are the responses you can be expecting from the seller. And then as the buyer then, if the seller responds with a different response, either no or let's talk about this more, then you as the buyer again have another opportunity to say, okay, yeah, we agree with the seller, we like what they had to say, or you can decide, you know what, I can't do this, decide to back out, or again, we can propose an additional option, right? Maybe there's another alternative. Or what I always tell people is if you really need this and this is what you absolutely need, it never hurts to say the same thing back to the seller again, because you never know if the seller was like just hoping that maybe you would do something different, and your response back can be, you know what, no, we really need this to get taken care of, and stand your ground. And the seller can then say, you know what, okay, yeah, we'll just go ahead and do it. So there's a lot of different strategies kind of tied into this process. This is more the process as far as strategies go. If you're the buyer in this situation, I always tell people to focus on the main things. When you're purchasing a house resale, which is the majority of homes in the Seattle area, there are some new construction, but not a lot. You're going to be buying an older home. So there's going to be issues with the house. Some of this is deferred maintenance. Some of this is actual problems with the different systems or structure of the house. And they all have varying degrees of relevancy and also risk. So if you're the buyer and you get a 80-page report, a lot of times they're not that long, but maybe it's a 30-page report with 80 punch list items. If you just drop that report in a PDF and say, hey, seller, take care of all these items, probably not going to get very far. They'll probably say, nope, not going to do anything. If you're approaching it though as a, hey, there's a couple big ticket items right here, and you can focus on those, get more information, come to the seller, and you can say, you know what, these are all pretty easy to do. Like I can touch up the paint here and there, but I really want to get this water heater replaced, right? I had a transaction recently where we really needed to get the water heater replaced because the water heater was essentially the heater for the house. It's a hydronic heating system, and so the water heater's leaking and it's failing, right? It's failed according to the further inspections that we got, and it's expensive. It's super expensive because it's a fancy water heater, high output, and it's going to power the heat for the whole house. It's not just providing hot water. So this is like super important. If you're the buyer, you want to have heat in the winter here in Seattle. It doesn't get super cold, but it's not warm either. And so getting that hot water heater replaced is highly important, right? And so we got all the information, and we presented that to the seller, and the seller initially was like, well, I don't want to do that. Maybe I'll do some of it. But we had that opportunity as the buyer to say, you know what, no, we really need this to get taken care of. This is really important. Take care of it. And then the seller was like, yeah, okay, cool, I'll do it. And so that's an example of, okay, we went through the process of getting an inspection. There was some little stuff, but we focused on the big stuff. And then we went ahead and we got additional info. We presented it to the seller. The seller had all the info and was like, but see if they'll do it for less. We're like, no, this is important. We don't want to split the cost of this. Please get this taken care of. The seller did, and we got closed. So that's a microcosm of what this process can look like. I would say, the big high-level view of this process, and I'm going to peek at my notes just so I make sure that I say this how I want. You're going to be thinking about a couple questions. The first one is, what am I getting myself into? That's why you're doing this inspection process. You're getting informed. What's the house like? What are the issues? Are there issues? Things like that, right? That's the first question. And the second question you're thinking about is, how does this affect or impact my buying decision? Do I still want to buy the house? If I do, are there things that need to get done and taken care of ahead of time? And then that last one is that, do I still want to move forward? And you're going to be asking these questions as we go through, right? What am I getting myself into? But then, okay, do I still want to move forward? Based on the seller's response, do I still want to move forward? Based on what I found out, do I still want to move forward? But overall, I think that's a good way to frame this conversation. The home buyer inspection is really important. And if you've never bought a house before, I highly recommend it. If you've bought multiple houses, I highly recommend it, because it's always good to have another set of eyes putting their eyes on your house. And especially somebody that's looking at houses all day long, they're going to pick up stuff that you're not going to see as you're walking through and you're all excited. I had this happen to myself, right? I walked through a house that my wife and I bought, and during the inspector was like, the backside of the garage is rotted siding and it's not painted. I was like, oh, I didn't notice that. I do this all the time. But I was the buyer and I was so excited. Oh, I love it, everything. And so you just start to tune out all the little details and you start to focus on the big picture and all the things you love about it, but you miss all those small details. And so that's why we have that inspector come in to look at all those small details, point them out to you so that you can make an informed decision. Thank you so much for watching this video. I know that you found value in it, so if you did, please consider subscribing to my channel. If you watch this video all the way to the end, definitely give it a thumbs up as well. And if you think or know somebody that would find this information valuable, please share it with them so that I can get the message out. Thanks so much for watching.